Patching Azure SQL Active Directory authentication is a crucial process to ensure the security and integrity of your database. To begin, it is essential to understand the key concepts involved in Azure SQL Active Directory authentication. This authentication method allows users to connect to Azure SQL database using their Azure Active Directory identities, providing a centralized identity management solution. The first step in patching Azure SQL Active Directory authentication is to check for any existing authentication issues. This can be done by reviewing the Azure SQL database logs for any authentication errors. If errors are found, it is essential to identify the root cause of the issue, which could be due to incorrect configuration or outdated patches. Once the issue has been identified, the next step is to update the Azure SQL database to the latest version. This can be done through the Azure portal by navigating to the Azure SQL database resource and clicking on the Update button. It is crucial to ensure that the update does not disrupt any ongoing database operations. After updating the Azure SQL database, the next step is to patch the Active Directory authentication. This can be done by installing the latest Azure Active Directory module for PowerShell. The module provides CMD to manage Azure Active Directory, including the ability to update the authentication configuration. To patch the Active Directory authentication, use the Set Azure SQL Server Active Directory Administrator CMD to update the administrator account. This CMD requires the tenant ID, server name, and display name of the administrator account. It is essential to ensure that the administrator account has the necessary permissions to manage the Azure SQL database. In addition to patching the Active Directory authentication, it is also essential to configure the firewall rules to allow incoming traffic from the Azure Active Directory. This can be done by navigating to the Azure SQL database firewall settings and adding a new rule to allow traffic from the Azure Active Directory IP address. Best practices for patching Azure SQL Active Directory authentication include regularly updating the Azure SQL database and Active Directory module for PowerShell. It is also essential to monitor the database logs for any authentication errors and to test the authentication configuration after applying any patches. In conclusion, patching Azure SQL Active Directory authentication is a critical process to ensure the security and integrity of your database. By following the steps outlined in this guide, you can ensure that your Azure SQL database is up to date and secure. Remember to regularly update the Azure SQL database and Active Directory module for PowerShell, and to monitor the database logs for any authentication errors.